Hello and welcome back. I hope that your team had great success with teaching Cluster 1 and you felt as if you could go deeper into learning about nonfiction text. So as you begin to prepare for teaching Cluster 2 with a focus on fiction, I want to highlight some of the big ideas and essentials that are important to keep in mind when planning for instruction. So throughout this cluster, you will bring focus to the role that characters play in fiction text by spotlighting how the characters we encounter as readers take us on a journey while we read through their interactions with other characters, with their interactions with themselves, and within the world. So in this cluster, students are going to focus on really getting to know the characters by studying them deeply. And they're going to first have to observe them, and then they're going to come up with ideas about them based on what they've read, while later investigating patterns that reveal deeper character traits and motivations in order to articulate evidence-based theories. So with doing this really heavy thinking, this type of work that your students will be doing is going to help you better understand how your students are understanding the character's significance in the stories that they read. So this is kind of like an overview. You have 4 weeks of instruction and you have your learning outcomes listed here along with your resources that you can use for planning, along with some ways in which you can integrate other content areas into your reading workshop. So you're going to begin the cluster by administering the cluster pre-assessment to each student, and each student is going to read the short story from STEM Scopes called A Snowy Day and answer the open-ended questions that align with Figure 19's reading comprehension skills. And this data is going to be very helpful in making further decisions about instruction when you plan with your team. So keep in mind that the goal for students is to become very well adversed with the language that promotes thinking of Figure 19's comprehension standards. So a really great way to allow your students to become comfortable with that type of language is to embed it into your mini lessons, as well as have students respond to text using these sentence stems from the process fluency chart. So a great idea or a suggestion is maybe to print this off and put it in your students' readers' response journals. We provided some great mentor text that you may choose to utilize during your mini lessons when you're having conversations about the story's characters. And like I mentioned before, this cluster is 4 weeks long, and within that window of time, you'll be covering Readiness Standards 3.8a, where students are sequencing and summarizing the plot's main events and explaining their influence on future events. And also 3.8b, which students will be asked to describe the interaction of the characters, including their relationships and the changes that they undergo. So for the amount of time that you've been given, 4 weeks within this cluster, you'll really be able to take your students thinking about characters very deep and having a lot of rich conversations about their development and the relationships that the characters have with other characters in the story. So a goal that you might have for your students throughout this cluster is you want them to grab a hold of the idea that the characters in these stories are very relatable to themselves, in the sense that they encounter similar problems and obstacles that they may face in the real world. So by allowing your students to make connections to the characters in the books that they read, they're able to develop a deeper understanding of the text. So as curriculum writers, we've written a mentor lesson that you may choose to use when teaching about characters, as well as several suggested mini lessons from your curriculum resource text, Lucy Calkins' Unit 3 on Character Studies, and then also the Reading Strategies book. So as we move into, you will also notice we have put into the cluster planner some student samples that are great to reference when having discussions with your teams about how you're going to hold your students accountable for their independent reading and how they will be responding to text. So as we move into the bottom half of the cluster planner, you will notice that the focus shifts from character study to sequencing and summarizing the plot's main events and their influence on future events. So it's really critical that students have a solid understanding of the characters and the role that they play within a story before making that shift to having students summarize. And I think what's going to be most important to keep in mind with your students is that they're going to have to that you as a teacher are going to have to really play an important role when deepening their understanding of just the term summarize. We've tossed around that word here and there, but we want students to truly understand the meaning of summarizing. So your students are coming to you this year with the understanding of how to describe similarities and differences in plot and setting. However, your students are going to need heavy support in building an understanding that when readers summarize, they're identifying the most important, most critical information to create concise statements and understanding of the story. So be sure that you really are strategic in planning and scaffolding that learning in a way that helps build a solid foundation of what are the most important events so that they're able to identify that when summarizing fiction text. So we have provided you with a few visuals of a structure that you are familiar with, the somebody wanted but so then, when reinforcing summarizing fiction text, as well as a 3-day mentor lesson that will allow you to analyze, that you can analyze with your team and discuss if this is something that you think would be beneficial for your students. We've also included several suggested mentor lessons, ideas from curriculum resources such as the Reading Strategies book and also the Strategies That Work book. So be sure to take a look at the student samples of how students in the past have responded to text when summarizing fiction to kind of help with how you are going to reinforce summarizing within your classroom and how students can model their understanding while they're responding to text. We wish you the best of luck with Teaching Cluster 2. Our hope is that this document really supports you and your teammates while planning for instruction. Please, we ask that you reach out to your IC for feedback on how we can make this document even more user-friendly when planning for instruction. Good luck!